Yes, yes, we can. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So again, this is a presentation of the review that I'd written for Diti on Brihat. And again, I say similar to what Raghava had said, I'd been following Aravindan Ji's work for a while. He's a regular contributor to Swarajya. But off late, I think the past 3, 4 years, which is actually when I started reading his work also. But I think his ideology and his positions on certain things really shifted, led to a bunch of disagreements. And I was actually blocked by him. I do not remember what the argument was, but he doesn't like my opinions. But nevertheless, I feel like when Raghava told me that it's critical that we review his work because that is what we do. We need to kind of counter, discuss, always give every idea its chance. Um, so when I started reading this, I have no biases. I do not really care who wrote it. I'm just arguing or kind of thinking about the position from my own idea and understanding of history, culture, sociology, whatever that may be. So again, I'm just putting that out there. I have no personal beefs or animosity with the author. The other thing is, again, yeah, so I was saying that his kind of ideological positions on certain things became, in my opinion, a bit uh, anti-dharma in some ways. And I'm going to kind of, and again, his opinions presented in the book are pretty tempered and measured in comparison with what we see in public discourse on Twitter or elsewhere. So again, taking everything with a grain of salt, approaching everything with an open mind. That's what we're here to do. I think that's all. I'll just go to the next slide. This is what I'm going to kind of present today. Um, I've even in my review, since it's a really big book, it's around 600 something pages, quite detailed. So I picked out the portions that I want to address, and that's the same thing I'm going to do in this presentation, and address some of the key themes, tell you what I agree with and disagree with, and why. And it's an open forum. We can all think about why this may be valid or invalid, whatever that is. So we're here to evaluate ideas at the end of the day. Um, so as for a preamble, sort of thinking about what the author is intending to do through this review, the entire premise of this work is that he is evaluating India's sociological, socio-cultural history through a dharmic lens. So he is positing himself against the Marxist, Orientalist, colonialist readings of Indian history, and he's uh, kind of presented his views and his analysis of that, kind of reframing history in a way. So he draws from different sources again. Again, he's not a traditional scholar as such. Again, I would say anyone who's not a traditional scholar, I would call a layperson reading Puranas, Vedas, or Smritis. And again, that is never, uh, again, even if I read it, I would say the same thing, which is that is never a purely traditionalist view. But nevertheless, he draws from these sources uh, to mount a response against many different Marxist, especially tropes that are out there, um, especially when related to Harappan society, Vedic society, Buddhism, and the interaction with Buddhism with Hinduism, and Hinduism's evolution, within within Dharma, the evolution of caste and what that has meant up until um, modern day, whatever, colonial India, and up until post independence. So that's what he's done. Um, so this is the first chapter. He talks about Indian exceptionalism of the birth-based stratification. He says this is a problem. He says Hinduism's Jati and Varna system is misunderstood, and Indian culture, address social stratification the way its own core values and cosmology and its view of not just like inherent human nature, but also in human interaction. So society and all of that were laid out. And due to our philosophical and religious kind of outlook, and that is the way that society was arranged and organized, and that is the way it worked, because that was the underpinning, the karmic and Vedic underpinnings to societal structure was a key cohesive kind of force for that. So uh, so that's what he says, and again, it's a long chapter. This is the basic crux of it. But I think what I pointed out in my review is that he says that, again, he spends a significant portion of the beginning of the book talking about how birth-based social stratification, social aristocracy, and exclusion, stagnation are not unique to India. So he actually goes through many ancient societies, whether that's Egypt, um, I think a few others. I don't remember which ones right now, but it goes through many ancient societies, even Western societies, even Maoist China, like pre-modern Maoist China, and says that there is a system akin to caste in all of these societies, and therefore this is not unique to India, and therefore it is not whatever he's trying to say. He's saying it's not bad or whatever. Again, that to me comes off a little insecure. First of all, I think the entire reason why caste is opposed, or not reason, but the basis on which it's rejected, is its social whatever stratification, exclusionary practices, etc. And saying that they are not exclusive to India isn't really a response to the fact that it exists. So again, it's not a justification, and it doesn't, to me, it doesn't address the issue. It doesn't address any of the claims that are made, especially by Marxists. So again, like saying that some other societies have it and it's normal is not really saying anything good about our society, and that's how I felt the chapter went. And nor is it like, yes, knowing, say we can talk about slavery, and say, all pre-modern societies had slavery. That doesn't say anything about whether it's a good or bad practice. We can't justify it just because it's uh, common to all pre-modern societies. We can only say, okay, it was present to this degree in this society, it was like this in this society, and it is what it is, sort of thing, and it's not really, it doesn't really go anywhere, in my opinion. Again, we'll address this a little more when later on in the presentation. Next, he spends a significant portion talking about Hinduism's interaction with Buddhism and Jainism. He counters all the claims that Buddhism and Jainism are egalitarian and all of that. He says that they're not, and again, the name of his chapter is Luther and Buddha. So he kind of compares Buddha to kind of a Protestant figure, and the rise of Buddhism to uh, the response of Protestantism to Catholicism, uh, and compares it to Buddhism and Hinduism, which is inaccurate in many ways. Again, Buddhism, as the Indic scholars look at it, is in many contexts, and prior to kind of the Orientalist lens on Buddhism, and kind of separating it, and drawing harder lines in the sand with respect to this kind of sectarian lines with respect to Buddhism, Jainism, and Hinduism. Prior to that, it's seen as by Indic scholars as something that is kind of within the fold but away from the core. So sort of something that exists outside as a tradition, but within the same kind of framework and kind of larger umbrella of dharma, which I know that there are many ways to disprove this point also, because of kind of a lot of debates between Hinduism and Buddhism, Buddhist scholars, which are very famous. But still, in some ways, again, I'm not saying I'm fully right. I'm just saying I just want to make one point here, which is, when he says that Buddhism helped, or the response mounted by Buddhism against traditionalist Hinduism contributed to the ossification or stagnation of caste divisions within Hinduism. I feel like that's a tall claim to make, and it doesn't have any evidence. So we only have evidence of some evidence. A lot of those manuscripts are lost to us, but we have some evidence that there's a philosophical debate raging, but we don't have much idea of what it meant to the common public, to how it really affected caste. So I feel like it's a kind of a tall argument to make with little historical basis. We do know that in fact Hindus were seen as a unit, and I think there are a lot of inscriptions and a lot of literature from, especially from the south, from Orissa and Andhra Pradesh, etc., which talk about how Buddhists were seen as outliers to Hinduism and excluded from society in some ways. There's a lot of kind of slurs assigned to Buddhists. So again, I don't know where all of this fits in. I don't know if all the information that we do have available kind of fits into his argument. So which is why I'm just on the fence about this sort of thing. It also oversimplifies the evolution of caste, right? So saying that caste or all the negative aspects associated with caste, like stagnation, exclusion, what are untouchability, and all of these things are stemming from interactions with Buddhism and Jainism would be a very heavy oversimplification. I feel like we're discounting a lot of different historical events, mainly being Islamic invasions, colonial rule, and all of that, even during colonial rule, different Orientalist readings, the carrying out of the caste census, which did crazy things for caste. So, so again, I feel like it discounts some things when he's talking about this. We also don't have an exact idea of when we saw the rise of untouchability or caste-based exclusion on the level that we saw, or we have solid records of during the colonial era. So again, I feel like some of these things are very hazy. We don't know when some things arose. We don't know if, or I think most scholars really assume that caste-based rigidity and exclusion were mostly a modern phenomenon after the 17th century. So again, some of this is a little dubious to me. So again, this is one of the good things that he's done, which is he's framed caste as like the yajna framework. He draws from especially some of the Vedic literature, and talks about how all occupations or vrittis are seen as kind of a ritual and a sacred act. And this was the way in which caste-based occupations and caste-based acharas or different rules, if I like to call them, were sustained through the millennia. So again, this kind of the sanctifying of all work, sanctifying of professions, whether it's agriculture or art or trade or whatever it is, and a very kind of rigid demarcation kind of kept this philosophical framework intact, I'd like to say. So this is a good thing. This is how we like to look at this, how traditional scholars view it also, as everyone's caste-based prescriptions are their yajna. That is what we do for moksha. So I think this is something that kind of comparing, say a carpenter or a woodworker or an artist, comparing their work to a priest and their role in attaining moksha. So it's the same framework, and that's how we look at karma, dharma, and all these things. So I think this made sense. This is another section of his book is basically on bhakti literature, bhakti saints, and the entire bhakti movement in general, which he leads that into modern reform. So modern reformists like Dayananda Saraswati, Phule, Ambedkar, Rajaram Mohan Roy. So again, very lengthy discussion on many Tamil saints, Bhakti saints, um, many Bhakti saints through the centuries actually. And he talks about each one. He talks about each one's story. He talks about their role, and he says this is how much literature we have on how caste wasn't exclusionary when it comes to religion and all of that, which is well and good. But to me, when we isolate Bhakti saints and every literary straight literary reference, say Appar says, Shiva is this, and they're all many of the Nayanmars and Nayanas were low caste. So when we think about them as low caste, or when we think about them their in their literature or their poetry or their songs in isolation, to me it feels like it takes away from the point of it, the transcendent nature of it. I feel like looking at everything from this uh, kind of egalitarianism lens kind of detracts from the true purpose of it. And again, the average Hindu who is not concerned with Marxist narratives about their religion doesn't look at Bhakti saints like this. They don't think about, oh, this Bhakti saint was my caste, this Bhakti saint was this caste. And I feel like that is something that we've learned to do. We go to Pandharpur, or we go to, and we don't think about Tukaram's caste. And every Hindu as a whole deifies that saint. So I think on some level, kind of bringing this, it just takes out the wholesomeness to it. Kind of, this is, while it might be superficially a counter to kind of some of the Ambedkarite voices and all of that, and Marxist voices, of course. I think at the root of it, I think it's, to me, just uncomfortable. I'm not saying it's wrong, because yes, it does make a point. Yes, there was always a way in every monastic order, every sort of bhakti tradition that emerged, say Vaishnavism, say Veerashaivism. Many of these had casteless, quote unquote, um, kind of uh, whatever, they were casteless. So the caste from which once they were inducted, their caste didn't matter anymore. Their caste wasn't regarded anymore. And I get that there is, and again, these are all traditions that exist like outside the core, but never challenging the core tradition, the core of the Vedas. Never, they don't challenge the Vedas. They don't. All of them still agree that the supremacy of the Vedas, and still exist outside of that. But you know, but still, some sort of social mobility and some sort of all of that exists. It does. So I'm not saying it doesn't, but again, it's just a little skirmish for me when we think about, say, Karakaya Mayar. She was a widow who lived in a cemetery, and she composed poetry for Shiva. So when we think about her caste, or do we think about her, transcendent bhakti? Yeah, I feel like that's just something that, again, this, I don't know the audience for this book really. I felt like it was more intended towards people who are already inclined to this sort of thinking. So I'm not sure. So again, that's my opinion. Just gonna Okay. So again, this is a good portion. He says that bhakti aided transformations that were very different from very violent upheavals or revolutions in the West. Say we take the French Revolution as a complete rebellion against aristocracy in France and all, and that was violent. So again, bhakti traditions are all quite, again, like I said, they don't challenge the existing structures of traditional schools. They simply start their own uh, school, or school of philosophy, or monastic order, or whatever that may be, and they do their own thing. So I feel like, yes, it has allowed Hindu society to evolve organically and address some social challenges and maintains cultural continuity. I feel like many bhakti traditions are such that you don't reject other bhakti traditions, which is unlike many sects in Christianity, where they take up certain practices and reject every other group's practices. So So that, yes, this is a really good thing. Um, but again, this whole discussion is framed with the use of the word reform, emancipation, which again goes against his own book's premise, which is the premise is that we are looking at Indian history and caste from a dharmic perspective. We don't look at it as a negative or a bad thing, and therefore the use of emancipation becomes a little problematic because emancipation means that there is an oppressive structure that you are rising above or you are emancipating. So again, this is very, in my opinion, Ambedkarite thought. So even though again similar to Ambedkar's writings, where he also said good things in certain contexts about Hinduism, similar to that, this is also I felt like this didn't do anything above that. So when again it implies that the system was oppressive and needed uh, rising above. So that's again also the word also has connotations from the Christian West, from slavery, because emancipation from slave owners. So again, this is a very harsh word in my opinion, and even reform. I know we look at reform as a very novel word now, but um, prior to the colonial era, before Raja Ram Mohan Roy, before a lot of colonial legislations that intended to undertake reform. Prior to that, reform was something that just happened organically. No one thought about it or set out to do it. I feel like, um, again, like as we discussed with the rise of the bhakti sects. Uh, so I think I mentioned this through the presentation. I've mentioned this here and there, the Ambedkarite lens that he takes in many contexts, a dialectical view of caste. So I feel like somewhere he is self-contradictory in that he frames caste-based occupations and other caste-based, um, well, descriptions as quite egalitarian because they are, and seen from the holistic, very cosmology-driven view of uh, occupation, work, karma as a yajna, as a all of that. So all of that. So he sees it like that, and he also sees it as oppressive. So again, the bridge was lacking in the book. So somewhere the bridge exists where these things heightened and became far more oppressive as time passed due to different social factors and foreign invasions, etc. So I feel like that link was a little lacking, and therefore the point doesn't come through as well as it should have. In some ways, again, where I mentioned this when I talked about the Bhakti saints, but revisionist views of portions from the Puranas and from historical events. Like, for instance, we all are very uncomfortable when the Ekalavya story from Mahabharata is seen as a tribal person and all of that. So, and there's little context behind interpreting a story from the Purana in that manner. We can't just apply it to modern society. So that is something he undertook, and that is something we don't like when leftists or Marxists do. So I felt like we shouldn't do it. Uh, he also undertook a chronological kind of analysis of the Vedas, which traditional scholars absolutely do not do. We don't read his Vedas or Puranas as a historical text. We do not see them like that, like a relaying of history. We do not see some portions of the Vedas being, um, added how the Indologists do. This portion is added later, so this could have arisen due to this social circumstance. And I think that is something that we accuse Indologists of doing, and we should not do. So that is something that he did do in a few points in the book, and which I didn't like. Again, the last thing I would say about this book is just heavily detailed. It's very tedious to go through. There's too much information to make a point. I felt like some things could have been very, very uh, brief and succinct, and that failed. So I felt like in that way, getting his opinion from the book is a little difficult. You have to really break it down and read a lot to get it. So I feel like in that way, it's not a very easy read. Then I just want to discuss a little bit about I guess how say Sitaram Golji um, would look at caste and where this could have improved a little bit. I know that his ideological position on caste is out there, and it's influenced by modern social movements. But beyond that, I feel like he did um, fall into some of the traps that Marxists and leftists have laid for us. So by agreeing that caste is something that needs to be vilified, we're already ceding so much ground. I feel like the I think negative aspects, like say untouchability or something else, need not be attributed to caste. They are different sort of social practices that existed in a certain context, and uh, they just require contextualization and not apologia. And that's where Sitaram Gold was, unapologetic. He was fully, uh, you know, eh, fully defending us, but not defending in an apologetic way. I feel like there's some sort of fierceness behind that. Um, so again, he's again missionary vilification. This it's the same thing that missionary literature says about Hinduism and caste was in many ways reiterated by Aravindan Ji. So that again it's uncomfortable for us. It's not uncomfortable, but I'm just trying to say it's not ideal. You're trying to present a Dharmic view of history. I feel like we shouldn't go down the same road. I feel like when you have something fresh to say and something that is truly, uh, Dharmic to say, I feel like that is different. But this came off as, all these we had all these reformists, we had all these people. Reform happens internally, and therefore it's good. So again, that to me that's how I look at the whole thing. So so yeah, like I mentioned earlier, he praises the same reformers who actually divided society more. Uh, for instance, Ram Mohan Roy, who was actually a convert to Christian, the Phules, who really uh, instigated and sowed divide between the lower castes and or I don't like to say lower castes, I guess the castes. So I guess this is how I would view his work, and this is what I kind of presented in my write-up. And again, a lot of disagreements, but I did mention a lot of portions that were kind of good in terms of setting the sort of narratives that we should be thinking about in this ideological space. Uh, that's all from me. Raghav, if you have something to add about Sitaram Ji, you can. Okay, I don't know if he's there. I guess we can also open up to discussion, questions, whatever that may be.
Thanks. Thanks, Sai Priya. That's a
Yeah.
very insightful review. I mean, it's as you said, it's a tedious book to read. And to confess, I haven't read the book fully. Thankfully, Aravindanji wrote a conclusion towards the end, which captures pretty much the essence of the book. I think the idea of, to me, it appeared that the idea of writing a book is kind of presenting a Hindu anthropology point of view. Now, if that is so, I mean, this is a question to Raghavji and you. Can we really call it Dharmic in the first place? Because Dharmic lens would require someone who would have understood Dharma Shastras or a Dharmic point of view to start with. So, what Dharma are we? What Dharma lens are we looking at when we're looking at these topics?
Yeah, exactly. So I'll let Raghava comment after if he's there. I'm not sure if he's there. So, but anyway, like I mentioned, I think uh, looking, like you said, employing a Western lens for this is not a Dharmic view. So, uh, so again, agreeing with missionaries, agreeing with colonial uh, narratives surrounding Hinduism, and then saying this is the solution for it. It exists internally, and all of that is not a Hindu view in my opinion. Um, the discipline of anthropology or Indology itself, the disciplines are themselves founded through an external lens on Hinduism. It's never going to be a traditional scholarly lens. So I absolutely I agree with you.
And I think when it again, I haven't read the book, you can correct me, but I think when it comes to the explanation of the impact of Buddhism and Jainism on the ossification of the so-called Jati Varna system in India, I think ample critique should have been done on Buddha's views from his earliest scriptures themselves, where he quotes Anguttara Nikaya. The same Anguttara Nikaya, Buddha actually chides people for miscegenation, which is Varna Shankara. He actually kind of speaks against people marrying outside their Varna. So I think the ideas of Varna Jati were very much the same for Buddha during his time as that of what the traditionalists would have been practicing at that point in time. Maybe that lens was missing, but if it was there, please correct me
No,
there.
yes, I agree with you, and that's a good point. The Varna system was still as embedded in society. I feel like it wasn't a reactionary thing like he portrays it to be. And like I said before, it's not. We have no. We don't have evidence of what society was like then, and what and if there was an immediate reaction or change uh, at that time. Even following that, say Buddha's lineages and stuff, there is I feel like there's still very much for upholding many caste hierarchies, talking about Brahmins and all of that. So I agree with you. Again, it doesn't to me he doesn't clarify these things well enough. I feel like there isn't enough depth there. Uh, Again, even the historians don't seem to have enough depth in these issues because some of this information just isn't available to us, or I don't know what the issue may be,
Yeah,
but yeah.
I mean, I can try to give a couple of instances to bolster the argument that we are making here. Um, Probably Buddhism was never such a huge social force as it was made out to be. Now, again, this is contestable, but the argument that trying to put forward here is we have inscriptions from the Ikshvaku kings of the first century AD from Andhra, where the kings were performing Vedic sacrifices like Nishtoma, Jyotistoma, or whatever they are, and the queens were patronizing Buddha and Buddhist saints, Nagarjuna, etc., and both happening in the same place, in the same milieu. So it could not have so happened that if the Buddhist monk who is influential enough to get patronage from the queen could not have influenced the king. So probably there was some kind of agreement or some kind of maybe there was not as much disagreement as we thought at that point when it comes to the social um, process part. Of course, there are philosophical, theological disagreements
Yes,
which
yes,
we very well
yes.
know there are heated debates, etc. But I don't think the social reform part was strong enough back then as it is made out to be. Um,
Absolutely.
and I think the other part, I think bhakti uh, again, this is my uninformed opinion, you may say so, but bhakti probably is not as much, again, a huge social mobilizing factor because even if we look at instances like Tukaram and various other saints that Aravindanji mentioned in this book, it hasn't really uplifted the caste in a way that a Westerner would think of uh, from which the saint belongs to. Even up till
Yes.
pre-modern times, these social structures by and large remain the same, and they were not looked down upon in the first place to start with. But I think one good thing is probably unintentionally addressed in the book because there is now an accusation that bhakti is basically is Christian influence on Hinduism because the Christians were supposed to have entered India in the early centuries of the first millennium. But to counter that, Arvindanji mentions this Heliodorus pillar inscription where
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
the Greek ambassador comes and
Yes.
donates
Converts to Vaishnavism. Yeah.
and is converts to Vaishnavism and
Yes.
expounds Vishnu
Yeah.
Bhakti. So I think that's a
Yes.
good point there. That was waiting to be
Yeah.
made.
He
Um,
also mentions or he locates bhakti. in Vedic roots. So he says bhakti still
Absolutely.
existed
Yeah.
then. So
Right.
that he does, yes, that's good. But like you said, socially, I don't know. But religiously, it is emancipatory, right? Like in the sense that if if certain things were left to the domain of priests earlier, then those things kind of changed. Uh, for instance, before during the Vedic era, there was strict kind of philosophically and religiously it was a strict idea that your offerings or your whatever whatever offerings they had to go through Agni. They cannot be offered directly to the deity, and therefore all offerings are through Agni. So that changed a little bit when it came to ritual worship and all of these things, and these things branched into bhakti. So so yes, I mean these things it did evolve like that, but we don't really look at it like that. Another example would be um, basically nama. So chanting nama
Yeah.
is a bhakti era thing. It didn't exist before. So all these personal kind of rituals that arose due to bhakti traditions are absolutely attributed to that, but they don't affect social stratification. They're religiously kind of freeing or religiously and personally kind of uh, for the devotee. They're made for different. Yeah. Okay. Someone has a question, but yeah,
Yes.
I think you should finish first.
No, I think that's pretty much it. I can see Jatayu ji raising a hand. Jata ji, namaste. Thanks for joining in, and please, ask your question.
Yeah, namaste, namaste. So how many questions or points can I make?
Maybe a couple. Maybe a couple of them.
And let me take it up one by one. See, the first thing about Indian exceptionalism, I think the speaker mentioned that this was unnecessary. Okay, video. Let me try starting it. Okay, can you see it now? Fine.
Yes.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, so so he has given enough of a justification as to why it is a very important point, right? So Louis Dimon, Ramachandra Guha, Wilkerson, there are many Marxist anti-Hindu thinkers who said that caste is an Indian exceptionalism. In fact, one of the major propaganda in the 19th and 20th century India was that caste, such an oppressive system like jati, never existed in any part of the world, and only Hinduism oppressed all its people in such a bad way. So so in that context, it is very important to bring that anthropological view that every society in the world went through those phases. And in fact, he makes one very important point that in the West, the birth-based discriminations were abolished because of colonization, right? So much colonial loot and slaves were brought into Western countries so that whoever was doing menial jobs or at the lower strata of the society simply moved up. And it was the abolition of some of these discriminations was not really due to a very enlightened wisdom or something. And then he contrasts with the Indian scenario where the Hindu spirituality genuinely wanted to uplift all people. So in that sense, I think it's a very important chapter, and I really don't think it was unnecessary. And the second thing about the Buddha, actually, I was very confused, and it was amusing. So whatever you and both Lakshmi ji was Prasad sir was saying, Aravindan is saying the same thing. In fact, in a much more with much more references in the book, right? The word Lutheran Buddha that he uses, that's a pejorative remark. Actually,
Yeah, I know that. Sarcastic. Yes.
Aravindan doesn't say Buddha was Lutheran. In fact,
Yes,
it
yes,
is
I
a
know that.
colonial reimagination of Buddha. That's what he calls it. Buddha was like a regular philosopher who did not challenge caste at all, is what Aravindan says. So
Yes,
it's not
absolutely. No,
what
no.
he was,
I'll clarify here. Yes, I'll clarify. Let me clarify, please.
right?
I agree with all of that. No, I agree
Even
with
the
all
Varna
that he's
Sankara
written.
part, which Lakshmi Prasad sir quoted, actually
Yes,
he
yes,
quotes the
yes.
same thing in the book also, saying
I
that
know that, yes.
and then actually the new perspective he brings is that untouchability and especially stigmatization of certain castes like butchers and fishermen was a specific contribution of Jainism and Buddhism. And I think he gives solid evidences for that. I don't know whether how deeply you read that part of the book. One example he gives is the way fishermen are described in Kalidasa's dramas, right? Or in some other Hindu epic dramas versus how they are depicted in the Buddhist kavyas and Buddhist texts. So I think that's a very important and perhaps a original contribution of Aravindan. And I don't think we can brush that aside that easily, because he gives quite a few references on the ossification of castes, and especially from the Tamil Bhakti movement, right? Where I mean, Thiringyana Sambandhar, I think, is one saint that he quotes, that still there are actually folk songs sung by fishermen in the Nagapattinam coast, where he says that the Jain was not allowing us to come up, but then this child of Shiva came and he freed us. There are folk songs like that. So
Yes,
I
yes.
think he
No, just one thing I want to clarify here.
data on that
No,
count.
I didn't mention the parts I agree with. I didn't mention them here. I just
Right.
mentioned a few of the things that I disagreed with. Again, I put forth some of the good things, and I put forth more of my disagreements. I agree.
Yeah.
I agree with the
And the
information
other
presented
thing what
there.
you said,
I just made my issue with the point that we despite literature, we have less evidence of how it
no,
actually affected
actually
society.
we do have, because he gives for example, I think he gives Fahian's one reference by Fahian, where he says he describes Mathura as a city which lives with a strict Varna stratification, and then Fahian expresses his happiness that it is very much in line with the Buddhist doctrine.
Right.
Right? So that is
I
not just
know.
a
Yes,
literary
yes.
evidence; it's a historical evidence also. So I think and the third thing that you said is that the way he has been describing this, all the bhakti saints, etc., completely from the caste perspective, I think that's a very unfair acquisition. In fact, what he does is the complete opposite. See, for example, Narayana Guru, everybody calls Narayana Guru as social reformer, but he used the word Advaita Paramacharya to refer to Narayana Guru. Okay? In fact, he in multiple
That's one
places,
example, but in other places,
not one example, not one example.
every
In fact, in
biography that
many
he gave
places,
of every bhakti saint, he starts with where they were born and which caste they belong to.
that is
Every
important.
saint.
See, someone needs
Yeah,
to document that. It is not just
very
him.
good. No, I'm just
No, it is not
fine,
just
fine.
him.
I get that it's pertinent
If you read the
information to
traditional
you.
hagiography, right, like Chaurasi Vaishnavanki Varta, which he mentions, or Periya Puranam in Tamil, or Mahipati's Bhakta Vijayam, he quotes extensively. In fact, he dedicated the book for his mother, who told him stories from the Bhakta Vijayam. Every
Yes.
one of these traditional hagiographies mention the jati and kula of each saint. Okay, so he
Yes,
is
yes,
actually very traditional in that aspect. By the
No,
way,
no,
it
no,
is
no.
not modern.
No,
Okay,
I'm not saying
if
they're
you
not
say that
mentioned, and I'm not saying it's
he has
not
done the
important.
same thing which the sadhu sant hagiographies of tradition has done it. Okay,
Right,
in fact,
right.
people try to obfuscate that. He has brought it out. So in fact, I think that deserves appreciation, and in fact, it is even in the political discourse. You say that Hindus don't really care for the caste of a saint. That is not simply true. See, I'll give you an example from my state, Karnataka. For example, Kanakadasa, right? Kanakadasa is being projected as a Kuruba icon rather than a Bhakti saint. Similarly, many Veerashaiva saints, but Aravindan's book actually argues against that. He says that stratifying saints into as a representatives for certain castes is incorrect. And in fact, he deliberately chooses epithets and phrases to project each saint for recognizing the saint for his spiritual contribution rather than his caste or anything. And the other accusation you made is that he gives a revisionist view of Vedas and Puranas. Actually, I didn't come across any such thing. See, Kavasha Ailusha's story, which he narrates very evocatively, that is exactly the traditional interpretation of how that story is. In fact, he even quotes the mantra.
I'm not talking about the ones that are
the
very accurate. I'm just talking about looking at stories in a certain way because forced by modern discourse to do that. That's all I'm saying. I'm just making a very limited point. I'm not trying to disparage the entire book. Again, I didn't mention the things I agreed with. I didn't mention that. I'm not talking about.
And another thing you mentioned, I think I really want to make this point, that he is not a traditional scholar. So as if whatever, first of all, he is not writing the commentary for a Sanskrit text, right? He is writing social history. And to my knowledge, no traditional scholar writes social history. I mean, social history is a discipline which only modern scholars can write. Of course, they can cite traditional resources.
Yes, it doesn't exist it doesn't exist.
I mean, that acquisition stands only when he misinterprets or misquotes any traditional sources, and he has never done that. And, and specifically, the person who has given foreword to this book, Dr. Rangan, he is the founder of Valmiki Ashram in Bengaluru. He is a towering scholar of Veda and Ramayana. He is the Kulapati of a Vedic Gurukulam in Bengaluru, who has written a Sanskrit commentary called Dhvani Deepika for entire Rig Veda. Okay.
I'm not attacking anyone.
You should have at least mentioned it. That particularly
I don't need to. I'm just reading the book, and I'm talking about it.
That he's not a traditional scholar, or that
that's not an accusation I made.
But look at who has given forward.
Jataji, I think if Aravindan ji can be part of one of these sessions, he can probably defend himself. But thanks for putting forward those points. I think you're right.
Also, just would like to clarify, Vijay. I think Jataji has very passionately argued for some of the things, and those are things that we've also mentioned some of the good parts in the review that can be read. But to characterize Sai's opinions as accusations, I think is the first folly. These are not accusations. We are not, and we've clarified that. And traditional scholar, the argument that you're making, Jataji, is exactly the definition of calling somebody a non-traditional scholar. And Sai has also mentioned that she would call herself that. In a way, you're accusing Sai of labeling herself as not a scholar through your argument, which I don't think is the point that she's making. And on the exceptionalism, of course, this is not a forum to debate. We can have a lengthy conversation and understand each other's perspectives on that. But the point that you make about how exceptionalism has been characterized does not preclude the argument that Sai is making, right? That the fact that you entered the debate in that frame itself means that you are within that frame. Right? And those are just observations as valid as yours.
I think
we'll have other opportunities.
Argument, right? He just records it. I mean, that gives a pretext for the book.
No, I
understand that. No, I get it.
Yeah, I think we should also be bold enough to say that this book is a normative discourse about Indian sociology and Dharmic lens. It's not just a positive analysis of what was. It is how it should be reinterpreted and how it should be looked at. It should actually not belittle Aravindanji's work as just a commentary. We should actually say that there is a moral imagination that he has that is advancing through this work, which we might not agree in parts with, but of course,
absolutely.
We definitely.
I mean, he this book.
So therefore, it cannot be. Your argument cannot be both positive and normative at the same time. You cannot just say that it was just pointing it out, because he clearly has a Dharmic agenda. And we might disagree on how the Dharma interpretation has been done, but we don't disagree with the need for an interpretation of history and sociology like this. So I think that's the frame that Sai began with.
Yes. I couldn't have put it better. So thank you.
And one more comment about that word emancipation. I think see, the book is written in English and not Sanskrit. Okay. And actually, quite a few Vedantic writers like Swami Tapasyananda and Swami Gambhirananda, who translated Shankara's Brahma Sutra Bhashya into English, they have used the word emancipation, okay, in a very spiritual context in their writings. So,
Yeah,
so
but
I'm
he
sure.
not
I'm
addressing
sure.
all those, like
precedent
you
there,
mentioned the
and
point earlier.
we don't need to
Uh,
view every such word in a negative light because the book is written in English. So if you take any word in English, you can always say that it has a Christian origin, even the word God, right? I mean, even Dharma, even Swamiji's
Again,
use words like God Almighty while giving English talks these days. And
and I think
those are all Christian
standardization,
words.
emancipation has an entire theology to it, and we are all familiar with the Christian theology that it comes from. I don't think we should equate that. I think it's a deliberate, very careful choice of words. Aravindanji is a serious scholar. And like you mentioned, you cannot compare him with traditional scholars and draw analogies from tradition where it's comfortable, right? You cannot say Swami Gambhirananda did that, and therefore Aravindanji is right in using it, because Aravindanji, like you yourself pointed out, is coming at it as a non-traditional scholar who in a new discipline, and that discipline has a specific semantic importance. And Sai's position and my position and a lot of other scholars like Paturi sir and others who looked at it have made the same point about the word and the choice of that word is harking back to Christian theology, and that's okay. He probably looks at it as an emancipatory narrative.
But again, that's something for Aravindanji to clarify and
Correct.
give us
Yeah, I think the representation can only go so far. We'll have to pose these questions.
In the interest of time, can we move on to other participants if they have any questions, please? Ramyaji, I guess you have a question, and Sunil Kumarji. Srinivas, sorry, go ahead, sir.
Namaste. I actually appreciate Sai Priya ji's detailed review. I read the written review in detail, and then I came in here because I know how reviews they are different when put in written form, and then what we hear from the person who has reviewed, we tend to not only listen to how the intellectual analysis went, but also about their feelings. But I think that was very important. That's what Sai Priya ji brought up. She said what made her, what activated her, what brought up things within her where she felt probably conflicted and she felt like something didn't sit well for her. So I really appreciate that personal sharing as part of this. And I also have something to say to the remarks made by Jatayu ji, which is that Aravindan Neelakandan ji's work speaks for itself. Over the years, we've all read a lot of his work. But I am a little surprised that a scholar like Jatayu ji decides to show up today, and rather than helping us move forward with the discussion, for some reason, he started to react and start to hijack this discussion. So I do want to say that I want to register that surprise that I experienced when I heard this happen. And I just hope that Jatayu ji will take this in a good perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramyaji. Srinivas ji was asking, does Aravindanji define what is Dharmic in his work according to him? So if it is...
So this question this question came to me while Jatayu ji was expressing and trying to support Aravindanji's work. So therefore, coming from a traditional perspective, I would definitely love to know whether he was trying to actually put it, if he tries to define what is Dharmic, because the title itself has the word. And if he could have used that approach and show that everywhere, what is Dharmic in his perspective, maybe there, then we can have a very clear picture about where he's coming from. Because definitely the words like emancipation, etc., they have a lot of baggage with them. And we cannot actually justify by saying, that this has been used by some other people. And they have, so that we can also use it. So because we can even use the non-translatables thing that Rajiv Malhotra ji has actually, he proposed, and which is now gaining popularity. So therefore, this is my question. I haven't read the book fully. I've only read Sai Priya's review and some parts of it here and there. So therefore, I would love to know if anyone has gone through the whole book and has gone through this thing.
See,
So I
two
don't think he
themes
makes it.
uses yajna and bhakti or
Jataiji,
dharmic, right?
Jataiji,
I think that justifies the word dharmic in the title.
Jataiji, it's unfair for our guest to be hijacked like this. I would rather have Sai Priya
You
respond
asked a
to
question,
Srinivas.
so I'm trying to explain. Anyway,
No,
I'll type it out.
it was not. You can ask a question. Yeah, if you can type it. Yeah, thanks. Sai, you want to respond?
Yeah, I just want to say he doesn't really clarify that. Again, I think the perspective that he comes from when he uses that word, from what I read. Again, I'm not speaking for him. I just read the book and is my reading of it. I may be wrong, but again, so many clarifications I've had to make. But I'm just saying, I think it comes from, as a Hindu, I'm a Hindu, and I look at these things and these frameworks and these structures from a religious perspective, and this is my perspective. I feel like that is how I saw that. It's not really, it is conformant with every single shastric text. I don't think, because it addresses so much more than just dharmic issues and all of that. It's not an internal discussion, it is an external discussion engaging with external attacks. So I think that's how I would position that.
So there's one question from Sunil Kumarji. He says traditional scholars also tend to disparage the connect between modern science and ancient texts that were introspective and reflective. What's your take on more texts like this that provoke more thought?
I'm not sure it's very relevant to this, so I think we'll skip over that. Yeah.
Any other questions from any of our audience? So probably a question from myself. So how do we see literature like this, let's say, both from a traditional point of view and from a civilization point of view? I'm using these two words deliberately. When I say traditional Dharmic point of view and a civilization point of view. Is there a framework for us to take in this kind of information and make judgment ourselves? This is to both Raghav and Sai Priya.
I'll just say one thing and I'll let Raghava answer. I feel like he'd have a more deep answer. But I would think it's an outlier. It's outside of the traditional framework. Within the tradition, we only have commentaries to texts and commentaries to commentaries and texts that exist within that. I feel like this is obviously outside of that. To us, we have modern discourse that is created by the West, and we engage with Western works, Western critiques, Western narratives. And then we are reclaiming that space by bringing our opinion, because up until now, we haven't had a chance or a vocal, a free opinion due to different oppressive, things that exist in the world. Just, up until this instant in time, India was colonized or something else, or in English, we didn't have a voice really that opposes Indologists or whoever's writing about us. So I feel like this is us expressing our opinion, kind of defending ourselves, and also giving other Hindus food for thought. I feel like we need to look at our own religion a certain way, and that's where this work would exist in public discourse and not related to. I feel like tradition is unaffected by all of these discussions in some way, as it should be. Raghava, I'll let you answer.
No, yeah, I think it's also a very, very critical question that we are all tackling in the space of Indian knowledge systems, right? Because up until 400 years ago, there was no difference between education and culture. Your family was engaged in a profession and that became your learning, and therefore there was no separation between culture and education. In post-colonial societies, because there is a chasm between education and culture, we are trying to rediscover, like I said, the loss of something, the value of which we haven't recognized fully. In that sense, we have to engage with the Western disciplines. Linguistics or history or sociology do not become unimportant just because they didn't come from our tradition. But where you're rooted and how you look at it That is, I think, the realm of Indian knowledge systems. Tradition can continue, of course, giving us the self-knowledge like it has always been and guiding us. But there also has to be an arm, an intellectual arm, which is what Voice of India in many ways represents. And since we're speaking in a Voice of India context, Sritaram Goelji and Ram Swarupji did precisely this. They gave us the intellectual means to look at the other and be very, very clear about the separation between us and them. And I think in an academic sense, in a knowledge production sense, it's not antagonistic. Linguistics, history, sociology are all disciplines that we should engage in. And I like the framing that Dr. Nagaraj Pathuruji gives us on how to do it. He talks about the hermeneutics of common sense. Can you really glean the common sense principles from all of these disciplines and engage with them in the way you would look at yourself, but also look at it from the discipline, right? So that, I think, is the challenge that is at the center of all of our work in Indian knowledge systems. Because otherwise, how would you fit a living traditional and a living culture into academic disciplines that are not in consonance with your historical experience? How do you separate arts, humanities, social sciences, natural sciences, which is not the integral view of education that we've had? But since we have those structures and since we have those disciplines, we have the responsibility of the intellectual defense and also the intellectual I wouldn't call it attack, but the intellectual riposte. Right? So I think we have to be smart about it. And this book actually helps us do that. I'm very grateful to Aravindanji because he engages with science and sociology and the modern disciplines in that sense. But our challenge is to make sure that we don't dilute ourselves in engaging with those disciplines. That is where we will always anchor on the traditional scholarship.
Thanks, Raghavji, and thanks, Sai Priya. I think, in essence, I think there's a lot to agree with this book. But then I think when we make our points of disagreement more visible, I think that those are the things that need more need to be highlighted more and discussed more in a much more scientific manner, or maybe a dharmic manner, if I may say so. Thanks for joining in. Thanks for this very interesting and engaging session and conversation. And apologies for the technical difficulties that we had at the beginning of this session. And I hope Prahat and your team will engage with us more in future, and will ensure that there won't be any technical difficulties. It will happen smooth. And thanks for our audience for joining in and being patient for even after the technical difficulties. So thank you, Sai Priya. Thank you, Raghavji. It's a pleasure. And
thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And we can close this conversation today.
Yeah. Thank you, Adi. Thank you for doing Voice of India Academy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jetaiji.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Namaste.
Yes.
Namaste, Jetaiji.
Yes. Namaste.